flaunting restrictions. So I'll give them a look at the Capitol first. Give some time for people to jump on. I'm realizing my glasses fog up though. All right, so it's Jeremy Lee Quinn here of publicreport.org, and we are going to look at this as evidence-based journalism, like I always say. I will say one thing, though. I do not believe in censorship, and I believe in everybody getting the unfiltered truth. I talked about that a little earlier today in terms of what's been going on. And I think we need to have dialogue. We need to find out what's been happening. And that's the whole point of publicreport.org. And I'm here with none other than Ford Fischer. And Ford and I were both here on Wednesday. But Ford was on the east side and I was on the west. So let's talk to Ford really quick. And hey,
right.
Tell us, Ford. Yeah.
So just to introduce myself, my name's Ford. I do basically raw footage and live stream journalism, where I, for the most part, try to film situations with very little of my own appearing in them. Although sometimes I do interviews like this one on other people's platforms. As he was mentioning, on the day of the Capitol siege, people kind of came from the west, from the Trump rally. But I actually circled around all the way to here. So this is the east side of the Capitol. And this is basically where I spent most of my time filming during the day. So I filmed on the west side as they were kind of struggling to breach. And then once they actually kind of did break in, I came all the way around to here and then stayed around here until things kind of looped back as the night fell.
How do you make that decision when you're in the field that I'm going to leave an active scene over there and come over here?
Yeah, so it is definitely a struggle. To be honest, actually, the single moment was that people were scaling up the wall on the west side, and I was like, I physically can't do that. And so I wanted to see, what the next step of that would be, but I couldn't climb up the wall. I sometimes film at the Capitol like in normal circumstances anyway, so I'm kind of familiar with the architecture and basically realized I could probably just sort of flank around. So that's what I did, kind of a wide flank in order to end up on this side. And then I saw that people were basically heading toward the steps that are over there, which created some of the photos that now everybody's really seen of these steps being fully occupied and people sort of smashing their way through into that door.
So let's back up. You're on the west side for the first breach. Did you record that?
Yeah. So, that was the breach of the sort of security perimeter. I guess I didn't get to watch people on the west side break physically into the building. I filmed them do that on the east side. On the west side, I saw them breaking up and going up the stairs and climbing the walls.
They had those metal barricades, and they kept
Right.
moving them back as the crowd encroached, correct?
Right, and of course they failed to repel the crowd.
They failed what?
To repel the crowd.
To repel the crowd, yeah.
I mean, at a certain point, they basically were kind of giving up. I mean, not to say that they were like abandoning their post per se, but at a certain point, the police were just completely overrun. And so there were moments that I felt were actually critical moments in how this thing evolved, which was that the police, firing down the staircase with the, riot munitions. There was a moment where they basically just turned around and sprinted up. They basically tossed tear gas behind them, but it didn't hold people back for more than a couple of minutes.
So they were firing rubber bullets.
I don't think there was any rubber bullets. I think
pepper balls or
what I was seeing was pepper balls, tear gas, pepper spray, physical, hitting people with batons, grenades.
Now, to those of you who are just joining us, I just want to make it clear there were two fronts here that were going on at the same time. But how did you decide, hey, okay, so you realized, how did you know that there was stuff going on this side?
Well, I saw that people were generally just moving in this direction and they were going up, they were literally scaling the wall. And I was carrying at the time a studio sized camera. I couldn't scale the wall with my equipment. And so accordingly, I then flanked around and basically upon doing so saw that it wasn't just all focused on the west side, but that people actually were circling around to the east side. So I wanted to see what was going on.
How did the crowd compare here? Like how many people were here?
It was densely packed on the steps. Like you had to kind of like elbow shoulder your way through to go up the steps of the Capitol there. And then there were, of course, hundreds of people outside of the Capitol. Almost what kind of surprised me is that a lot of people were talking about targeting the Supreme Court, because on this side they have direct visibility to the Supreme Court building. And so a lot of people were saying first the Capitol, then the Supreme Court, and that just never materialized.
Interesting. I did see that on a flyer that it said the Capitol and Supreme Court.
Yeah, but it just didn't. I think that the idea of this march in its original inception, because remember, by the way, this thing had a permit, right? This was a rally with a permit, with plans, with police roadblocks to facilitate the march. I mean, this was an event that the police were not anticipating being violent and had facilitated. And part of their intention was to have people both at the Capitol and at the Supreme Court. And when everybody became focused on the siege of the Capitol, it seems like the Supreme Court was kind of left on the back burner.
Well, it was so dramatic because you had so many people on both sides. And I want to focus on two things. One, how the breach happened here. We saw video of what went viral and spun an alternative narrative because we saw some people just walking through freely, like they were being let in. Are you familiar with that video and what?
Yeah, so I have seen videos that have kind of tried to show this, and I think the thing that the context that I would invite people to sort of look at is that the police were so overwhelmed by people who had demonstrated their willingness to use violent force. And so while some officers, really even standing alone, stood to the end, there's one video of a cop who was like swinging a baton and trying to drive people away from the Congress, for example. But some police officers more or less stood by because they couldn't do anything else. So I've certainly seen that there's been controversy, for example, about police officers who allowed people to take selfies with them, for example. But I think the reality is that they were largely overrun. On my side, what was happening on the east side here was that once they did breach through that door, people were just going in and out and in and out. And literally there were calls, people were saying, we need fresh bodies. They're macing people. We need fresh bodies. And the idea was some people go in, they'd sort of fight the cops, they'd get maced. And once they were at a point of being maced too much that they had to leave, they would come out and then somebody would come in and replace them. And so it was this endless cycle where they the police couldn't get them to close the doors. And people were just going in and out.
So the doors were open in the first place.
No, they forced the doors open.
Oh, they forced the
doors?
doors?
No, the doors were closed for a while, and there was actually a moment that I had where there was like 12 Oath Keepers who came up, and I can't necessarily say it was pretty congested, right? So I can't say specifically like the Oath Keepers opened the door, but there was a pretty specific moment in which that door managed to open, and then people were able to start getting inside.
And how did you know they were Oath Keepers?
With Oath Keepers patches, right? So a lot of these groups were, or a lot of the participants were not explicitly members of groups. I mean, in particular, the thing I would point out is the previous 2 million MAGA marches had, 1,000+ Proud Boys at each of them, and everybody knew exactly who the Proud Boys were. This time, the Proud Boys said, we're going to be there incognito. We're not going to wear the Proud Boys uniforms. But that doesn't mean they weren't here. So I think
I just want
to was a lot harder to track here.
That's what I wrote the night before. My headline is "Who will know who is who." Exactly. That's what I wrote the night of the 5th because we were all at Black Lives Matter Plaza, and already we saw costume appropriation happening on the Tuesday night, the 5th. We saw some Proud Boys all in black, and in fact, I think you got a picture or posted something from Tuesday night.
Yeah, on the January 5th, there were a few Proud Boys who I walked by, and one of them basically flagged me over and was like, "We're the Proud Boys, it's us." And I was like, "Oh, you're like dressed like this? That's weird." And I took a photo of them, and basically they were all dressed in what I would call like semi-black bloc. It was like it didn't look the way that anti-fascist organizations do it. It looked like right-wingers wearing black.
My joke was that you're going to have all these people in black bloc with like big beards, like
right.
that you can't conceal. But
and they all had they had American flag sleeves and like American flag black T-shirt. It's like obviously an Antifa person wouldn't do that. So,
right.
But I don't think they were so much doing it to fool people into thinking they were Antifa. It was more like to conceal, their actual just intent, like their group affiliation. You can't look at someone and say, oh, that's a Proud Boy if they're dressed like that.
Well, I noticed that there's a lot of appropriation that goes on. Even that night that we're talking about, of Tuesday the 5th, I saw some people who were Patriot Movement MAGA people that were wearing those orange beanies from Shutdown DC, which I thought was interesting.
That was an interesting development. And I did see some reporting claiming, and again, I can't authenticate this, I wasn't the person who reported this, but I saw reporting claiming that the orange beanies were worn by Proud Boys on the 6th.
On the 6th. Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised. There was all this costume appropriation that I noticed the night before, and that's why I said, who's going to be able to tell who is who? But the Oath Keepers weren't shy about it.
The Oath Keepers weren't shy about it. I was going to say, so as much as other groups seemed unaffiliated, or at least not openly affiliated, the Oath Keepers were dressed basically in militia gear, absent firearms. And at the same time, we're wearing, Oath Keepers patches and things like that.
And did you see guns?
I personally don't believe that I saw an openly carried firearm on the Capitol on one side.
So this is interesting because this brings me to what I was talking about earlier today. Basically, when I talked to MPD, they told me the original report was there were 5 incidents of firearm confiscation. They upped that to 6 for a crowd of tens of thousands. I call it an arena-sized crowd.
Yeah, I would certainly say tens of thousands were in the city. I think thousands participated in the action surrounding the Capitol.
I would say on the other side that there was an arena-sized crowd.
Tens of thousands that actually made it to the west side.
On the west side there was. You had a much smaller crowd here, right?
It was smaller, but it was forceful.
small but forceful. Yeah. Well, one guy I talked to was paramilitary, and he self-identified himself as an extremist. He said, "I'm an extremist. It's here." I'll show it to you at some point. But folks, it's on my website. The interview that I'm talking about, it's at publicreport.org/capital with an O. And I interviewed a lot of people from praying grandmas who were celebrating getting into the Capitol to other activists and a citizen journalist who is from the right to this self-proclaimed extremist. He said he was on here and he led the charge on the media pen. Did you see that when the media got attacked?
He said that he led it?
Yeah, he said, I decide to go there and agitate, and we decided to agitate the...
I'd be very interested to see that interview. Yeah, that was there when that happened. That was more like there.
Yeah.
So that was kind of on the northeast corner, more or less, of the Capitol. And this is an area that the media pen is kind of like always set up. Like, it's not just like, because of the Capitol that there were people there. Like, it's pretty normal for there kind of to be like one of every like news station camera just sort of there and ready for whatever. And so I'm sure they certainly were filming what was going on there because it had come. But that's sort of a specific media spot all the time. And so there was a moment after they had cleared the Capitol facility, but not before they had cleared the Capitol grounds, in which indeed they're basically pro-Trump protesters ran at the media and screamed, "We are the media." The media had to like flee. They basically made off with their cameras, but they left a ton of recording equipment behind, which the Trump supporters then proceeded to pick up and throw down on the ground repeatedly, smashing it and screaming "F fake news."
Yeah, and when it comes to this group, how would you characterize how they worked with each other? Was there much coordination, or did you feel that it was autonomous, or was there? How does it compare to other stuff that you've seen? Because we've all seen these autonomous action protests that.
I think that there was some sense that it was organic. I mean, I feel like it was certainly driven by the speech that the president had just given. Trump just told a crowd of thousands of people, "We have to fight like hell because if we don't fight, we're not going to have a country anymore." That's a big thing to say to a group of people who really believe that this will literally be the last stand for their president, who they believe has been cheated out of the election. So I'm not blaming the president in the specific sense of saying like, "Oh, Trump caused it." But I think that it certainly riled people up, where it wasn't about having a leader that said, "Onwards, let's go storm the Capitol." It was more like people were inspired by this speech to go and storm the Capitol.
When I got there, the first thing that I saw, because I got there a little later than Ford did, and basically what happened is that people we saw plumes of tear gas on the other side, and one guy turned to to another and said, it's now or never. And it's now or never was kind of the feeling that we were getting. I'm just going to just take a look if there's someone says, well, here, right, before we get to this, let me just, because I know you're short on time. Now, Ford's been doing interviews all day, so we're lucky.
This is my
fourth, so we're lucky to get him and talk about this stuff. The gun thing is really interesting because 6 gun arrests,
Yes.
and they couldn't even tell me if they happened in the Capitol or they were found in cars. So
Right.
For a crowd of tens of thousands of this demographic, does it feel like to you that resistance tactics might have been appropriated tactically for this?
To be honest, I'm a little bit lost on your question.
In other words, did it compare to how you have seen other riot actions on a technical level play out? In other words, there was nobody there with a gun. A lot of people, what trended on Twitter? Armed insurrection. Was this an armed insurrection?
For the most part, this situation was not armed. So, there were people who were armed, certainly, with all sorts of other weapons, tasers, pepper spray, clubs of various kinds, and people actually physically took the riot shields out of cops' hands and then used them. But no, for the most part, I personally didn't see any firearms. I know that there were some present on scene, but it wasn't a prevailing aspect of what happened.
How do you know that there were some present on scene? I'm just curious.
So, I have seen one photo that shows somebody who's pretty obviously has a handgun on their belt. And as well as my understanding is that the Capitol Police have arrested at least one person who was inside the Capitol, and they got him on firearms charges. I know that 2 of the arrests must have not happened in the Capitol because they happened before all of it for concealed carry. But I would also just point out that the Million MAGA marches previously each had about a dozen or so firearms arrests, right? So in Washington, D.C., almost nobody can conceal carry anyway. Like, concealed carry permits are hard to come by. And on top of that, they have basically banned firearms, even for those who do have the permits, for anybody near a demonstration. So you could not legally carry a gun at these events anyway, even if you have a DC concealed carry permit. And also, DC doesn't have any reciprocity with other states. My understanding of the previous events was that concealed carry arrests were largely as a result of people who believed mistakenly that their concealed carry permit would be recognized in Washington, D.C. while it wasn't. But I guess it remains to be seen whether firearms really played a part in the insurgency.
And this is something, folks, that I have been following, whether there were firearms. I messaged MPD again today, so we'll be following that very closely. There's also some, if you look at Unblocked Podcast, if you're on the YouTube, you see my interview with Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio, and one of the controversial issues is he showed up with 2 magazines. And
right. My understanding of Enrique, who I did film as he exited jail on the 5th. So he was arrested on the 4th on arrival into D.C., and then he was released he stayed overnight and then was released on the 5th. Enrique was actually arrested for an incident that I also filmed on the 12th of December, in which basically Proud Boys set fire to a Black Lives Matter banner that they had stolen from a church. And he took responsibility for the incident on Parler, although he hadn't physically touched the banner himself. Essentially, the idea was he's the chairman, and he was there, and so it sort of happened with his, permission at the very least. But when he was arrested, he had 2 magazines. Both of them I've seen a picture of them. They look like AR mags to me, but they're modified to have a Proud Boys insignia on them. And supposedly the explanation that he gave to police officers, that there was a transcript readout of this, was that he told the police officers that he had them because this was a product they sell, and he was intending to sell them to somebody or give them to somebody who had paid for them, but that he couldn't ship them to for some reason.
I see. There's some speculation, and only speculation, I suppose. It's unconfirmed, but we'll look into it, as whether he wanted to challenge or test the gun laws, so to speak.
I have not heard anything.
Yeah, one thing he does tell us on the podcast is that he doesn't consider himself an extremist. The only view that he has that he says is extreme, he thinks, is that he believes there should be no gun laws. So that's something he told us. But hey, let's get a little further. The breach when it. Do you see Capitol Police just giving? Was it Capitol Police or MPD that was here?
Capitol Police for the most part.
Yeah.
Involved in the conflict here.
And at some point, do they just give up? How would you characterize that?
Well, I don't even know if I would just say, I don't think I saw them ever give up outright, like, here, like, have fun in the Capitol. But there were moments where they were kind of overrun. So on the west side, as people were trying to force their way up the stairs, eventually people were throwing things at them. It was actually largely in response to a guy fell like 25 feet.
I saw the video of that.
And so people were extra mad after that happened and really started pushing and throwing things at the police officers. And the cops then ran up the stairs, which was effectively, at least momentarily, a retreat. So the same kind of thing happened up, on the east side where, sometimes police were really just overrun and like forced back into the building. And that's not to say that they gave up, but that they just actually couldn't reinforce the door anymore. There was one moment of like real desperation on the, I guess, northeast north side. So from where we are, like just barely around that corner, where the police were being pushed in on, and they tried to close the door, and they tried to use zip tie handcuffs to keep the door closed. And that wasn't working. So a cop opens the door and he just dumps a fire extinguisher into the crowd. And I think that for me, that moment like really showed me like these were unprepared. They were unprepared, right? Like a fire extinguisher is not an effective riot control tool. It's certainly irritating. It really sucks to like inhale fire extinguisher fluid gas stuff, but it's not an effective crowd control mechanism. And so clearly it was a moment of desperation.
And do you think it emboldens the crowd in some way?
People were mad about it. And actually, so after they did that, some police officers had what is actually an effective tool, which is riot shields, right? A lot of cops with riot shields is a pretty strong tool, and they just did forcefully, like 1 foot at a time, move back, move back, move back. And when they did that, there was a lot of there were people who were pushing back on the cops physically. And there was actually one moment in which there was a few flash grenades exchanged, or not exchanged. It's not like the civilians didn't have flash grenades. There's flash grenades thrown at the crowds. And there was one guy who got maced, and he like turned around and like he had like a large canister of mace, and he blindly maces back at the police officers like that. And so, the Trump supporters certainly fought back, I guess is what I'd say.
When was the last time you saw a right wing action that I guess hit this kind of critical mass?
Yeah, I mean, so I did have a freelancer for me out in Salem, Oregon, on God, I'm like losing track of time now.
I think it
was like June, or it might have been January, like 1st or 2nd.
Okay, so that was the second one.
I think it was January. I think it was Jan 1st.
Okay.
That there was a right-wing protest against mask mandates and for Donald Trump, right? Stop the steal and reopen the economy kind of hybrid protest.
Yeah, they had two of those, one in December and then one.
Right. And so at this January one, they had riot police who were kind of like ready to go, and it was basically peaceful until like the end of it, when some of the right-wingers were trying to like basically go tussle with the left, and police got in the way and protesters started fighting with the cops. And similarly, it came down to tear gas, pepper spray, some right-wingers arrested. And it was interesting because by the end of that, and again, this was filmed for me by a contributor, Marini Ray. This wasn't filmed by me, it was edited and published by me. By the end of it, the protesters who had originally brought like thin blue line flags, back the blue, right, were saying no more backing the blue, F the blue, that kind of stuff. And at the end, they actually like stomped on the flag and then threw it at the cops, right? So, I think that it basically shows there's probably as Donald Trump loses grip of power, as Donald Trump is about to leave, the right wing that was sort of emboldened to be sort of paramilitary supporting the person in power, I think they're kind of losing their grip of power, and that's changing their relationship to the state.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I kept saying that those Oregon incidents should have been some kind of canary in the coal mine, some sort of bellwether about things were going. But we didn't know. Were you caught flat-footed? I was caught flat-footed. I didn't even have my gas mask with me.
I had my gas mask and goggles with me, thank God. But I was so covered in tear gas, though, or tear gas, pepper spray, all this stuff, that actually when I got home, my housemates turned on the air conditioning in our living room because apparently it was starting to irritate their eyes, me being in the room next to them.
I guess, were you surprised that it happened during the day, since the pattern hadn't been that?
That was surprising to me. Originally, what I had told news agencies who are relying on my footage to expect is I think it's probably going to be peaceful during the day, and then people are going to be angry when the results are certified, and then they'll riot at nighttime. That was sort of what I thought would happen. And I was also concerned about the possibility of individual acts of basically terrorism or that kind of thing, that could happen if even only a single person wanted to stop the certification from taking place. In my mind, because it was so obvious that so many people would be coming and so possibly angry and, insistent on doing something like this, I really thought the police were going to be set up much like the way they are now. I thought the police would have been more prepared, and I was surprised when they weren't, but I wasn't surprised that the thing happened.
Very interesting. Last thing, did you go in the Capitol?
I didn't go inside the Capitol. So for me, that just felt like one step too far. So I spent a lot of the time at the door filming people go in and out. I even had shots that went, essentially all the way through the Capitol because the interior design, it's all straightforward. So I had a lot of shots that basically show the inside of the Capitol, but I was at that doorway a lot of the time and did not go in.
Well, that's a question each of us had in there. I had that moment of, do I? And then I just said, I did. But just as a First Amendment sort of thing of freedom of the press. But, it's a personal decision. It was crazy. It was literally unlike anything I think either of us have probably ever seen.
That's true.
Yeah. And then, so... who was there? In other words, all these pictures we see of the people in the rotunda? Yeah. Right. Is it like the Viking guy and so forth? Was it that group, or was it a different group?
I did document the Q Shaman guy come out of... The Q Shaman is the name that guy goes by with the Viking helmet.
Yeah.
I did film him come down the stairs on this side. So I didn't see him enter, but I assume that he entered this way and came out this way.
But this was the access to the rotunda, right? Because I'm trying to figure out if you went in from the west.
Yeah, because the girl who got shot I believe also entered this way. And I found out that the girl got shot because I interviewed someone right at that door who was saying, Vice President Pence, the blood is on your hands. You could have stopped this. You had to stand up for Trump. And then he goes, now we've got a girl who's been shot inside and she's dead. And I was like, whoa, what? And he was like, yeah, there's a girl who got shot inside. And he said that he was with her when he saw it happen in there. So since he had just come out from that side, again, I believe that she had entered that way as well. And of course, she was the one who didn't come back.
Wow. It's been so hard to get the story out. How have you, and feel free to be as reserved as you want to, but when you see things getting covered and you experience it, and do you think there's a schism of sorts between what you see on the ground and then how it makes its way into the press, and how did that manifest?
Yeah, I think that it can certainly be true that, the reporters, the news anchors who talk about things are not the ones who are actually there on the field, and that can make it really difficult. I see actually a question on your comments that I wanted to answer.
Sure.
I see that somebody said, where was Mike Dunn in all this? Mike Dunn, to those who don't know, is a Boogaloo militia kind of guy from Virginia, and he actually purportedly was in Washington, D.C. afterwards. I didn't get to actually see him that night. I've covered him many times before, but he had photos later in the night that sort of purported to show him outside the FBI headquarters, and he seemed to claim some level of involvement. However, I didn't personally interact with him out there.
Gotcha. And let's just end with after the rotunda, after everything's breached, does this side clear out at around what time?
So this side seems to be organically dying down a little bit around like 5 to 5:30, and so that was when I wrapped around back to the west side. And it was on the west side not long after I got there that then riot police came to that side to start clearing it out with riot shields. There was a little bit more flash grenades and a little bit more of the pepper spray to get people fully out of the west lawn.
And I was
I was by about 6, so I think I left at about 6 because that was when it seemed like the action was over.
Okay, it seems like that would have been right after or during when I left as well,
Right.
on the other side. Well, cool. Let's give you guys a look at the Capitol. And anything else you want to add, or sort of?
Let me just. I saw that somebody asked where do I actually find me. So my name is Ford Fischer, FORDFISCHER. The organization is called News to Share, which it's written on the hat, and so it's called News to Share on Facebook and YouTube. So feel free to PM me or anything like that. I try to be responsive and answer questions and stuff like that.
Excellent. And y'all, if you go to my Twitter too, at JLeeQuinn, I mentioned his link is there to follow him at Ford Fischer as well. So thanks for being on with us. Is there any last sort of closing thoughts about what the heck we just witnessed on Wednesday?
Well, I guess I would just say that it was a historic day, and we're going to see what happens on, January 17th. There's plans for armed rallies. I'll be covering the one in Columbus, Ohio, which I believe is probably going to be one of the bigger ones, and Richmond, Virginia on the following day, the 18th, and then I'll be back in D.C. to cover inauguration action from the night of the 18th on.
Okay, wow. Well, everybody, you got it there? It's Ford Fischer. Check him out. As I've said to you before, there's like a handful of guys. I see them, they appear in my video, and I'm finally being able to like track them down and have conversations with them. And it's really exciting because we realize that when we compare notes, we've seen a lot of the same stuff play out. And we're going to try to new interviews. You just click on the interview section if you go down to the third video, and you'll be able to see my interviews from Wednesday. Peace.